I'm reconstructing Greek bronzes and the Greek and Roman trade in art, and it's my pleasure to introduce Carol Mattusch. Carol is Cathay Professor of Art History Emerita at George Mason University, where she has taught for 4 decades, specializing in Greek and Roman archaeology and art. She is also a longtime member of the Managing Committee of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. In addition to her consulting and curatorial work on many major antiquities exhibits, she is academic advisor to the Power and Pathos exhibit of classical bronzes currently on display at the National Gallery of Art, and she co-authored several catalogs for the exhibit. And as a plug here, if you've not been to the National Gallery to see this exhibit, I urge you to go. It is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Carol is the author and co-author of many scholarly articles, chapters, and authoritative texts in numerous books. She's received numerous awards during her career, including, to name just a few, the Charles Rufus Morey Book Award of the College Art Association and the James R. Weissman Book Award of the Archaeological Institute of America. She is the recipient of the Paul Mellon Senior Fellowship and the Samuel H. Kress Foundation Paired Fellowship for Research in Conservation and Archaeology of the National Gallery of Art's Center for Advanced Studies in the Visual Arts. Carol earned a BA at Bryn Mawr College and a PhD in art history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Go Heels. And with that, please hold questions to the end and join me in welcoming Carol to the podium.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here and to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the best exhibition of all time. These bronzes, 50-some bronzes, have never met each other before. They've never been together in the same exhibition. I've seen them now in 3 venues, first in Florence at the Palazzo Strozzi, then in Los Angeles at the Getty Museum, and now here at the National Gallery. Each time it's totally different, and it's a really fantastic exhibition. It will be on until March 20th, so if you haven't been to see it at least several times already, please go and see it. It is well worth your time. There. I should say first, I think, in this excursion through the exhibition as a preliminary to a visit, I should say something about the title, Power and Pathos. And I think this head from the Roman Agora at Delos is a good example of those 2 things. This is a portrait of one of many portraits in the exhibition of a powerful person, an important person who's had a lot to deal with. And he's in all the art history textbooks. He's usually known as the worried man. You can see why. But the word pathos, he's a powerful man, obviously. He wouldn't have a portrait of himself like this, a life-size portrait, which is not just the head, all we have left, but which also included a standing, draped body. The other part of this portrait is pathos. And it's not what we mean by pathos. In ancient Greek, pathos was what happens to somebody. That includes your experience, the emotion or passions of the soul, everything that you've been through. That is the pathos. The whole statue, of course, would have told the whole story. And we can imagine that he was draped because he does have a little bit of drapery clinging to one side of his neck, as you'll see over here when you go to the exhibition. A draped, middle-aged man, his eyes still in place. This is one of the things that ancient authors talk about a lot, what it means to see the eyes of these bronze statues. There were thousands of portraits of important people, of images of gods and goddesses in the public places of Greek cities. But really, the Hellenistic part of this all begins with Alexander the Great. I show you, first of all, a couple of draped statues. These are important people. They both happen to come from a house in Herculaneum on the Bay of Naples, but you can see, for instance, by their attributes, what they have with them, book rolls here, who these people are. This is an intellectual, this is a homeowner. He doesn't have a beard and long hair. The homeowner is more of a businessman, and so he doesn't have the book rolls, the beard, the hunch of the scholar, all of that. But the Hellenistic period, which is what power and pathos is all about, really began with Alexander the Great, whom you see in a small image here on a horse. This would have been from somebody's front hall, probably on a table in the front hall, a beautiful bronze statuette, quite large statuette. It was found among the earliest finds from Herculaneum on the Bay of Naples, found in 1761, and it's tells you something about the people who had these grand villas around the Bay of Naples, and their townhouses, of course, are in Rome, but they had country houses on the Bay of Naples, in the mountains, various other places, and everything about their cultural lives was associated with ancient Greece, classical Greece, the antiquity that they associated with Alexander the Great. They spoke Greek at home. They educated their children in Greek. They had actors perform plays in Greek or recite from Homer. These people were the greatest of Hellenophiles, these Romans living on the Bay of Naples. So it's no surprise that they would have in the front hall, say, a portrait of Alexander on his horse. Now, the Greeks called themselves Hellenes. They lived in independent city-states, which were usually unfriendly, if not actually at war with one another. They all hated Persia, however, that Eastern empire that forced its entry into Greece in the early 5th century BC. Philip II of Macedon, here we go again. Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander brought the city-states together, in large part because they all hated the Persians. Alexander followed his father's plan. He conquered an overseas empire that included Persia and went much farther to the east, as far as the Indus River. So the Hellenes brought their world to places that they had never before imagined. And they brought back with them new ideas, new commercial opportunities, social and religious customs, and new arts and technologies. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his generals divided the empire into kingdoms. And that was problematic, but the empire lasted until Octavian, later changed his name to Augustus, defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium in 31 BC. So the Greek Empire at that point became Roman. And then it was soon after that Octavian changed his name to Augustus, a religious title. Modern scholars have downplayed the years between the reign of Alexander and the Roman ascendancy. It seemed to them that nothing could compare with the glory of 5th century Athens and the empire of Alexander. Here is a bronze portrait of Alexander in a private collection in London, and on the right is Andy Warhol's version of that portrait, which I saw one time in a house in New Orleans where I was staying, and I thought, what is this? But apparently he did a whole series of portraits of this head of Alexander in bronze. At any rate, scholars were fixed on the 5th century BC of Pericles and Athens, and then the empire of Alexander, and kind of stopped after that. But a German scholar named Johann Gustav Droysen, who had worked on Alexander the Great in the 1830s, made up the term Hellenistic for the period of time that ran from Alexander's death to the takeover by Rome. From the Hellenocentric viewpoint, as we might call it, the Hellenes had discovered the rest of the world, and they imagined that they had Hellenized it. Mostly, of course, they learned a lot in the East. They brought a lot home with them. And if you were looking at the advance of the Greeks from the Indus River, you would have a very different view of the growth of that empire than the Greeks themselves had. But Hellenistic is only part of what we're dealing with in this exhibition, Power and Pathos. It begins with Alexander, and we'll look at the notion of pathos in portraiture, technology, and how the market changes with production changes, and finally how styles never go away, but at the same time what the Greeks put up as religious dedications and victory monuments, the Romans reused in very different ways, many of them in the private sector during the Hellenistic period. This is a base in Corinth, from Corinth. It's in the first room of the exhibition, and this was always kicking around on the site, you know. When I was excavating in Corinth, when everybody else from the American school in Athens went to Corinth, we'd stand on the base and try to figure out how the feet of this bronze statue had been placed on it. And this is probably a pretty good bet. This is what that position might have been in an actual bronze statue, one from the Getty Museum, that has never before traveled. This is the first time it's been abroad in an exhibition, or afar, as it were. It did not travel to the Palazzo Strozzi, to the Italian venue of the exhibition, for obvious reasons, right? That somebody might have wanted to try to reclaim it. In fact, it was judged by an Italian court to have been found in extraterritorial waters. This was in the 1970s, so apparently it's okay that it's at a foreign museum. At any rate, that's a question that could still be argued. So, the base by Lysippus. It is, one of, half a dozen bases that are signed by Lysippus. Not a single statue by that artist survives, even though we know from the literary sources, ancient sources, that Lysippus made 1,500 statues during his lifetime. He was famous for making so many statues. Most of them were of athletes. And this is probably a recollection of the style introduced by Lysippus. One reason he could make so many statues was he introduced new technology with the help of his family members who worked in the family foundry. And so the new technology clearly involved production of a whole lot of athletes where you might change what he's doing with one hand, fingering his victory wreath, what he's holding in the other hand. It could be a palm branch, it could be a discus, something. But you make enough variation in the statue that it's individualized and it suits the persons who are commissioning it. Those would be the victor, his family, his town, and they would dedicate at Olympia a statue to Zeus, who's responsible for the victories. This would have been a typical statue. In the days of Pliny the Elder, who was writing his encyclopedia in the 1st century AD, he said, I've been told there are 3,000 statues still standing at Olympia and at Athens and in Rhodes and in Delphi. There were thousands of statues remaining at these sites, even though they had been fodder for the Romans since the early 2nd century BC, when they were picked up and carried back to Rome for Roman collectors. Cicero, for example, who was but a lawyer, was a very avid collector of Greek antiquities. If they were not collected as antiquities for Roman art collections, statues might be knocked down, broken up, and sold as scrap metal. Scrap metal is always a thriving market, as you know, from copper pipes stolen from building sites all over the place today. But a number of shipwrecks have been found, as you'll see in a minute, that contained scrap metal. The funny thing about the photograph, this is the photograph that's behind the statue in the exhibition here, and the funny thing about it is that these statue bases empty now of their statues. This whole row of them were statues of cheaters that were paid for as part of the fine by the cheaters. You had to put up a statue of Zeus. And so there's a whole row of statues of Zeus as you walk into the stadium through the arch in the back there. And it's a peculiar kind of dishonor, but these statues were also common as you walked through the sanctuary. You knew who cheated, and you knew who actually won a victory, or 2 or 3. Most of the finds, like that Getty bronze, come from the sea. Most of the finds of ancient bronzes, from shipwrecks or from storms where they get tossed overboard or they fall overboard, and so they're just individual statues dropped into the water. These are discovered by fishermen. It's been happening forever. There is now an underwater superintendency which goes around and surveys the Aegean region to locate shipwrecks that haven't been excavated, so that in case some looters come along, they'll be able to protect those sites until such time as they can be officially excavated. This is a shipwreck, or this is some of the stuff from a shipwreck found off the coast of Brindisi, where you take the ferry to Patras. Found in 1992. There were literally hundreds of pieces found in that shipwreck of all different dates. And they're bits and pieces, we know they're scrap metal. They've broken them up so they can pack them into the hold. And here's what they pulled up. Once you get them out of the controlled environment in which they were buried, in this case the sea, you've got to clean them up immediately. You've got to desalinate them so that the salt doesn't go to work ruining, corroding the surface. And there's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done. But they found so many bronze fragments. What are they going to do with them? They sent some of them to Rome, to the major conservation lab, and some of them to the lab in Florence. But it turns out that these two pieces actually fit together, even though one was in Florence and one was in Rome. And they figured that out. They brought them together, and they don't exactly join, but they clearly match up. What you can see from these is that the conservation carried out in Florence and in Rome is a little bit different. And so the surfaces, the head has been cleaned down farther than the torso. And conservation practices vary from place to place, but they also change over time, so that when in 1900 they'd find a bronze, they would strip the metal down to the base metal, removing all the corrosion products, the green on top, the red, brown underneath, and then find that corrosion eats into the base metal, so they'd have a pitted surface of the bronze. Now, instead, people use mechanical cleaning. They do it with tools and pick away at the corrosion, but don't go below the level of the base metal. So you get a wonderfully mottled brown and green surface on a torso like this. You'll see a lot of body parts in this exhibition, many of them heads, but you should remember that these bronzes are cast in pieces. So the head that you see by itself is actually a complete casting, just as the torso is a complete casting. If you look at this line here from hip down, it is a diagonal line that follows the line of where the drapery would have been in the next cast piece of this statue. This is a finished edge all the way along here with a notch up here. You see just a little bit of pubic hair, but then that drapery would have come along below that. This is about the line where the head had been attached, and so they fit together there. A lot of people go into this room of the exhibition and they say, that looks like one of the Kennedys, that head. And it really does. There's a little argument over whether it's Teddy or Bobby, but it sure looks like a Kennedy. And I just picked a photograph that got about the same viewpoint. But of course, the bronze has a little bit of a beard, short beard. He also has cauliflower ears, which nobody noticed until he went on exhibition. And what you have to remember about these portraits, it's not just about the head, the face. It's also about what they're wearing. If they've got cauliflower ears, they must have been, boxer, wrestler, or something like that, when he was younger, but now he's a leader, so he's draped with his cloak across his hip. And so all of these features, along with what he was holding in his hand, tell you about his past, his abilities to lead, as he is clearly a leader, this individual. Well then, this also comes from the sea. This was found in 2004, and until the exhibition first opened, almost nobody had seen this. It's a life-size statue. What is he doing? Who is he? We know from the classical past of the 5th and the 4th centuries that the Greeks had statues up, honoring victors, honoring intellectual and political leaders, generals, and they're all public monuments. But now we're getting into, after Alexander, who chose Lysippus as his court portraitist, everybody wanted to have portraits of themselves. And these are not all public portraits. They're private as well. And they're not all portraits. They're all different kinds of sculptures for the garden, for your courtyard, to remind your guests of you were friends with so-and-so, or you would bring as a house gift a portrait of Livia, the emperor's wife, a small-scale tabletop model, or of Demosthenes, or some other intellectual leader. And so there are all kinds of images that were unknown to the Greeks. The Greeks did full portraits. They're standing, they're seated, they might be striding and attacking if they're gods. But by now, after Alexander and the rise of interest in having sculptures in your own home, anything goes. And so you look at something like this and you think, well, this doesn't look like a traditional Victor statue. What is he doing? It looks as if he's stepping forward on one foot. If you look at his left hand, it's wide open, and there's some bronze globs on the underside, on the palm, as if to attach something. And Ken LePatin, one of the curators of this exhibition, found a 4th century red figure vase painting that shows this fellow pulling a sword out of a scabbard. And you wonder if that raised shoulder is raised because his arm is down, he's pulling a sword from a scabbard in this hand, and the lower arm here is somewhat flattened. This hole is not original, but it's may be around where there was a hole, and it could be there was a shield on that arm as well. But so who is he? He's not a standard victor. He must be involved as one of a group of figures, 2 or more, as this figure in the vase painting is. He's part of a very active group. We know from literary sources that there were hunt scenes with bronze statues, there were groups of warriors, there were all sorts of things, but is this from such a monument? It's hard to say. It's a very thin casting, very highly skilled casting, but it too is an isolated find from the sea. And we really can only ask questions about it. We don't know any answers. Speaking of finds from the sea, I'll show you this one, which is found in the sea off Croatia not many years ago. And it is a statue covered with barnacles and other stuff of a young man, an athlete, scraping himself with his strigil or cleaning off his strigil. If he's scraping himself, he's got oil and he's scraping off the dirt, or he's cleaning the strigil itself. Like many bronze statues found in the sea, it was first thought that this was a body, a dead body, but turned out not to be. Turned out to be a bronze statue, and it has been undergoing cleaning for a number of years. But let me go back for a minute to 1896. This bronze statue in Vienna, in the middle, was set up at Ephesus in near the coast of Turkey in the palestra or gymnasium of one of the baths there. And it stood between those columns, as you see, in a kind of niche on the left. When it was excavated in 1896, the statue had simply fallen forwards off of its base and smashed into 234 pieces. And what are you going to do with it? You know, how do you restore it? They realized, the Austrians were and are excavating at Ephesus, they realized that this is the same type of which there are some marble examples. This marble example has been known since the 1500s, I think. It's in the Uffizi. What's he holding a jug for, you're wondering? Well, because that's how he was restored in the 16th century. You don't sell somebody a partial statue. You restore it and you sell a whole statue. Looked as if this jug would be a good idea. Maybe he was holding a jug. They didn't realize then that this was holding a strigil, this type. But so when they found the Ephesus statue, they took a plaster cast of the marble statue in Florence so that they could restore the one from Ephesus accurately. And then they found the one in the sea off Croatia. That's the one at the right. So they had done a pretty good job of restoration on the one from Ephesus. This was a kind of chance find, this one. A couple of amphoras, not much else was found with the Croatian Apoxyomenos, as he's known. But if you start getting together other examples of this type of statue, you find a bronze head. It has very distinctive hair, this type. It looks as if it had dirt and everything, and he's kind of scratching his head. And so the hair is all messed up. It's exactly the same on all these statues. So even though only the head remains of this one, which is in Dallas, Fort Worth, this one has been known since the Renaissance. You know it's the same type of statue. It comes from the same type of statue. This one is incredible. This is from the papal collections from the Vatican, and it's not bronze at all. It's made of basanite, which is a very hard stone that comes from the Sinai. And Egyptians used basanite for images of gods and of pharaohs, period. The royal family and their gods. Well, the Romans could do the same thing. The imperial family had basanite sculptures for themselves and of themselves. There's a wonderful portrait of Livia, for instance, in basanite. But the curious thing about this incredibly hard stone, difficult to carve, is the amazing detail and the fact that it looks like a bronze. It would have been much more expensive to produce this basanite figure. How many people know how to carve basanite and can do a good job of it, than to produce a statue in bronze. Bronze is a repetitive process, after all, copying a model in bronze. So they did it so it would look like an antique bronze that was patinated, turned black. It's a very interesting question. They did it because they could. Cost a great deal more than just having a bronze, but they could. So they did. Anyway, the story of the Ephesus statue restored with by the marble statue, and then another bronze is found, and you've got the basanite one. It's a wonderful group of images. What happens to portraiture in the aftermath of the classical period and the Hellenistic period, where pathos really comes into play, is this. This is a head that was found in 2004. It's been exhibited several places now. Each time the loan fee is higher, and it's not at the National Gallery, but it was at the Getty and in Florence. Because each time they raised the loan fee at the galleries, we can't afford that. We simply can't. But it's wonderful to see the eyes preserved in some of these heads, and this is only one that has that. You can see copper eyelashes, which would have had a reddish color originally. Copper envelope that's bent, and you put the bone and stone eye in that, and the copper holds it in place, and then the edges of the copper are trimmed to look like lashes. But you've never seen a more incredible portrait than this man. This is a portrait of Seuthes, of Thracian king of the late 4th century, and it was found directly in front of his burial mound, as if the statue of him had maybe fallen down or something, and so it was interred in front of his own burial. Very rare find, and you will see it in Sofia when you next go there. But the portraits have a wide range of possibilities, and you see in this exhibition really good examples of portraits that are pre-Roman, Etruscan. Here's the Thracian again with his lashes, and this one down at the lower left is Macedonian with part of his eyes preserved. This one was found, a chance find in the sea, again in the northern Aegean Sea. And then there was another chance find, 3 legs of equestrians, at least 2 equestrians. And they found 2 torsos. And then they found a bronze dolphin. And then they found a draped woman. Well, what do these all have to do with each other, if anything? They all come from the same general area in the northern Aegean, and all over a period of just a few years by fishermen. So this continues, this kind of discovery. Here are 3 more portraits. The one on the right is a life-size boy in bronze, just found on the south coast of Crete. Nobody knows where he comes from or who he is, but if you look at him in the exhibition, he's got the most wonderfully grouchy expression on his face. The one in the center is a North African. He has, his mouth is slightly open, and he has a bone inset for his teeth inside the head. The one on the left, again, is the worried man whose pathos is fully evident. Think of these 2 heads as having whole statues to go with them. But there's not such a great range. The boy is draped, his hands enveloped in his cloak as if maybe this is a funerary statue of him. These men would have been in public places. The one in the center was found with bits and pieces of horse and chariot, and it may be that he is a charioteer or the owner of the chariot standing in his victorious chariot. This horse head has been known since at least the 16th century. They have exhibited here in front of a blown up photograph of a 19th century painting of Delphi with a lot of statues that, if you're an archaeologist, you'll say, oh, well, look, there's a serpent column, and there's that Apollo. And because they knew their archaeology well, these 19th century French academic painters. This one is Albert Tournaire. But the horse head is either from an equestrian statue or from a chariot group. We can't be sure. It was recently restored, although it had been known forever and influenced many equestrian statues from the Renaissance onwards. When they restored it, they put it at a more accurate angle for how the horse head would actually have been on a horse. It's the size of a large, normal horse, maybe 17 hands or so. It's absolutely fantastic. One ear back, the other ear forward, so he's paying attention to what's coming up, but he's listening to his rider, we would hope. And when they cleaned him, they realized it was gilded. There are traces of gold that you can see on the surface of that head. And if you look at the very famous statue of Marcus Aurelius in Rome, which is larger, you'll see the same position of the two ears, one back, one forward, and the same wrinkled neck, the same general position of the head. But this is a really fantastic piece, this Medici Riccardi horse head. But I should take us out of public places and have a look at gardens here briefly, because gardens were heavily decorated by Romans with statues from Greece, statues in the Greek style, and statues that were perfectly well suited to a garden. These two posts with heads and genitals are known as herms. And the herm originated with the head of Hermes on it, Hermes who protected travelers, and it was put in a city center or a crossroad, someplace where you might get into trouble with your directions or whatever. But the Romans transformed this type of image into a garden image. And you might have a portrait of a famous person on your herm, or you might have the head of Dionysus, who's been to the east and learned all about viticulture. This one on the right has vine leaves entwined with his turban. The interesting thing about these two is that they are based on the same model. The one on the left is in the Getty Museum from 1971. The one on the right came from a shipwreck off Tunisia in 1907. They are based on the same model, but the one on the right is a much more detailed version of that model. He also looks more grotty because he's been under the sea and suffered severe damage there. But what is this telling us about workshops? We saw this with the athletes with the sweat scrapers, with the strigils, that two of the same thing from different places. Here we have two of the same thing. They even have the same components in the alloy, the same trace elements, which suggest they might have come from the same workshop. Then why are they so different? Their measurements are pretty much the same, but the detail on this one is much greater. So what's going on with them, you wonder? Then, all of a sudden, I went to Aphrodisias a couple of years ago with my husband and some other archaeologists, and we're looking around and we see this head. It's the same thing in marble. Unfinished, but it's the same size. It's a marble version of these two herms from Turkey. So what you are seeing is the distribution of this same type throughout the Roman world. You want it in marble? They make it for you in marble. You want it in bronze? You order it in bronze. But these are available over a wide territory. I went to a foundry in Florence in March, and the man the head of the foundry was explaining to us how they do a work. And he said, well, we start with a photograph of the person, and then we have an art student come and render it in 3D by making drawings and then modeling it. Not with a computer, but drawing and then modeling. So this is the same thing that could have been done in antiquity. You're going to have people start with drawings and work from there. Or else there's a 3D model that is distributed. There are a lot of possibilities, but we always used to talk about the Greek bronze original and the Roman marble copy. We only think of the Greek bronze original because we have so few bronzes. And it's only been in recent years that we found ones like these two, or like the athletes with the strigils, that are the same statue, essentially. And they come from different places. But the whole process of making a bronze is, of course, repetitive. There was a story in the March art newspaper about a statue by Rodin of Iris, which, you know, that statue which is sort of leaping and you see it directly from the front. He made 7 copies of that. They were not all made during his lifetime, I don't think, but this one was sold for more than any other Rodin before, that is 11.7 million pounds, I think, because it was made during his lifetime. But you get the idea that there are a series of the same thing produced, and it doesn't bother collectors. Note the Hirschhorn's Balzac by Rodin. If you look at the label under that bronze statue, it says 1966. So what? It's Rodin's Balzac, isn't it? Just asking. 4 garden sculptures, to return to power and pathos. This is a perfect example of what you might choose. There are many of these from Hellenistic and Roman gardens. It might be a fitting for a fountain with a jug underneath him and water pumping out. Or maybe it's just a sleeping Eros with his wings folded, his quiver over his back. And it's such a beautiful child. But wait, it's Eros. And he can always be dangerous. Because if he shoots you with his arrow, you're in trouble. But will he? He's sleeping. Will he or won't he? Can he hurt you if he looks so defenseless? This is the kind of thing that you read about in Hellenistic epigrams. The question, is he okay now because he's asleep? Is he just a sleeping baby? Or is he still as dangerous as when he's awake? Here's another example, very similar one in marble. Then I want to show you one other piece that is in the exhibition in Washington that was not in either of the other venues. The dancing faun from Pompeii was found in 1830. They named the house they found it in the House of the Faun after that bronze faun who ornamented a fountain, probably. He has the most evil expression on his face. But he has a delightful body, you know. It's really beautifully twisting, lithe, youthful. But just take a look at his face and you think, oh no. Is this a satyr or is it Pan himself? He does have a tail. He was very, very popular from the time of his discovery. There are many copies of him in all sizes and different materials, modern copies. But I don't know of any other ancient figures exactly like this. Behind him in the exhibition, you'll see these 2 statues. The one on the left is in the Louvre, normally, and it was found in the sea at Piombino in 1832. The one on the right comes from a house in Pompeii, 1977. And they're basically alike. It's the same model with a lot of variation. So the question comes up again, what is going on here? This one had an inscription inside inside 1 foot, giving the name of a Rhodian or 2 Rhodian sculptures from Rhodes. What does that mean? We know these artists were working all over the Mediterranean, but was this on its way from Rhodes to somewhere else? How come he's just like that one? He's not, though. Their hair, their details are different. The feet are a little different in their placement. And the one on the left is a lovely figure, very feminine. The one on the right is more clunky and stiff. But what's going on with them? Maybe the answer is in the next room of the exhibition, where you see a beautiful classical statue, the so-called Idolino, which has been known since the 16th century. Very famous statue. Isn't it funny, though, that they never exhibited it with the tray that he was holding when he was found, because this is a silent butler. This is not just a statue. Sure, it works as a statue, but it was holding a tray supported by grapes and stuff. And there's no getting around that. There is an early illustration of that statue with his supports for the tray. Inlaid wood was very popular in Roman households. We read about statues serving as tray holders and lamp holders in Homer, in the Odyssey, in the palace of Alcinous. And we see them on Greek vases of the 6th and 5th centuries. The Romans take a statue type, whether it's a classical style or an archaic style, and they use it as a tray holder. Of course, when you're not having a party, you can take the tray off and, put something else in his hand. But this statue we found, this one from Pompeii, has a hole in his hand that was originally there. It's not a damage. And next to the hole is Roman numeral 3. Just as on his support, well, this is a support for the other one, but his supports are kind of similar, and they're in the case next to him. You will see the number 3 on the back of that support, so you be sure you put it in the right hand of the right statue. It's kind of surprising, but it doesn't make it any less of a statue or any less art. I mean, look at what they do with a statue like this, with the inset eyes made of stone, with the separately rendered curls. It's an absolutely amazing figure. But the fact that it looks like an archaic statue and it's a tray holder kind of upset scholars at first, as you can imagine. But you have to understand, he serves different functions from what an archaic statue would have in Greece. This is a reminder for the Roman owner of the house in Pompeii. This is a reminder of the classical past, of the Homeric tradition, of everything Greek that they were so fond of and that they loved to emulate. And so you get a tray holder who is also a statue. Thank you very much. I'll try to answer questions. Questions, yeah.
We have time for a few questions. We have some runners with microphones. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. They'll bring the microphone to you. When you get the microphone, please stand up, tell us your name, if you're a member or not a member, and ask a question.
Thomas Mann, retired from the Library of Congress. I'm just curious about the Herms. Both of them have these block-like projections at shoulder level, and I think it shows up in one of the paintings too. Is that characteristic of all Herms, and is there a good conjecture as to why they have that same structure and what it was for?
That is characteristic of Herms, those arm bosses or whatever they are. And it seems that originally they might be used, for instance, if you're passing a Herm of Hermes in the middle of, at a crossroads, you might hang a wreath or a ribbon over there as a kind of offering, and don't forget me, I'm trying to find my way home, or that sort of thing. And I think it's just a convention that doesn't go away, and they may have done the same thing without the same meaning in Roman times, in later times.
You mentioned a couple of statues of females, a tabletop. Oh, sorry. Terry Layton, I'm a member. You mentioned a couple of statues of females, one small tabletop, one of somebody's wife, and then one other that was found with a group.
But I didn't show any, did I?
No, but are there any life-size ones, or is there any information about them? I mean,
There
can you
are-
say a little more about them?
There are a few statues of women, but not nearly as many as there are of men, and they tend to be of goddesses. There's a large statuette of Artemis Diana in the exhibition. There's a head life-size of Arsinoe II, maybe, but there are far fewer women. Those that there are more often maybe goddesses. But if you think of how many important women there are in classical and Hellenistic times, in contrast to how many important men, that must have something to do with it. They're far fewer. And they had a hard time getting 2 or 3 for the exhibition.
Yes, my name is Steve. I'm from Alexandria. I'm wondering about the technical aspects. How did they build with the mold? How was the bronze extracted from the ground? How was it made technically?
The bronze, depending on what your resources were, you would have either a high tin or tin lead or lead, just lead and copper bronze. So the percentages vary a great deal. Even in one locale, you'll get bronzes with different alloys. Many of them have a large component of scrap metal as well, as Pliny the Elder describes, was always done, though probably not always. A statue would have been based on a model from let's say a full-size model from which you would take clay or plaster molds in pieces, put the molds together, put the model aside, put the molds together, line them with a thin layer of wax, take off these master molds, and then if you want to do any finishing to the work, you do it in the wax. After that, you invest it with another mold for the casting itself and put a core inside, and that's how you do it. It's the lost wax process, a combination of what we would call indirect casting and direct casting. That is, the direct part is when you alter the wax before actually casting it, so that you could start with the same model but make 2 or 10 or however many bronzes that are all somewhat different. How long would it take to make one? Well, it depends how big your casting pit is and your furnace. You can probably only melt about 200 pounds at a time. And a life-size statue could weigh 500-600 pounds. But it's cast in pieces. So, I don't know, you could do, if once you're ready to cast, it doesn't take much, maybe more 2 days. But to produce the model, then the waxes and so on, takes more time. For a marble, I can say for sure, it takes a good 6 months to make a full-size marble statue. You can't have more than about 2 people working on it at once. With bronze, where you're working with separate parts, you can have a lot of people working on it. You can have an assembly line production, which they did, we know. So it's relatively rapid, but that doesn't really specifically answer your question.
Timothy Thomas. I'm a member of the society. I'm wondering about the period of time from when they were made to when they were discovered. These earliest, you say, was 15-something that it was discovered. So these are lying around all over the Mediterranean, in the sea, in the shallow sea, and nobody's picking them up? They're sitting in the same gardens they were originally placed in?
Well, no. They were either carried off as scrap metal when those Roman gardens were no longer Roman, or they were destroyed. The metal is always useful, so you can reuse it. If they went down at sea while being shipped someplace, they end up in the sea. Sometimes, like that marble head from Aphrodisias, that was used like a block of stone in a later wall because it never got finished for some reason. But they're mostly chance finds.
So basically, nobody was interested in them for 1,000 years.
That's right. Christians should be interested in pagan deities. There are really interesting literary passages about the Byzantine feeling about classical statues. Was it a good idea to destroy them, or could they hurt you? You know, should you maybe keep the head anyway? And in fact, there are quite a lot of heads alone that survive from statues, as you will see in this exhibition. So it's a question of how you feel about a statue also. When Constantine turned Byzantium into a new Rome in the east, into Constantinople, what he did was he brought classical statues from all over the empire to stand in his forum, in his baths, and his palace. So those statues actually survived until the riots of the 6th century or so. But it's all chance. And so for Hellenistic bronzes, if you count the heads, we might have 200. And 50-some are in this exhibition.
Go ahead.
My name is Jim Griffin, and I'm a member. Some time ago, we heard a lecture about the Bronze Age and the shipping, economic shipping relationships in the region. And I wonder if that kind of history is any hope for help in your identifying the sources of these and the distribution of them.
It's some help, and it's a great deal of help with, for instance, marble, because we know the sources for different kinds of marble. And so we know when the Romans began importing certain marbles from Turkey, from Africa, and so forth. With bronzes, we haven't been able to source the copper, the lead, the tin, with a few exceptions. There's some lead isotope analysis that shows, oh, this lead has got to come from Gaul or Germany. And then another person will come along and say, oh, I don't believe in those. So first of all, though, you have to get samples, and it's extremely difficult to get permission to drill holes in the few surviving bronzes. So it's slow going.
I'm Eric Keel, and I'm retired from the Krieger Museum. I'm not a member. My question is the incredible sense of realism, especially that figure, the first figure you showed. Could you say a little bit more about the rise of realism as opposed to more abstract and more schematic representations of the human figure?
The rise of realism, that's a very interesting question, because it seems to start in Greece with the rise of statues of victorious athletes. At first, they looked just like the early statues, which are just maybe a post or something, a wooden figure. But then they become more realistic, and by the 5th century BC, they are sometimes really engaged in sport, doing things, statues and statuettes. So realism of in actions comes before realism in portraiture, which seems to begin much later, say in the 4th century, with the Alexander, and in the wake of Alexander the Great. We know, for instance, that his portraitist, who he loved what Lysippus made himself look like, you know, looking up towards the heavens as if he's getting a message from above. But at the same time, Lysippus is known for technical innovations such as taking molds directly from the human form, from the face, that means. So it goes to that same workshop, which was near Corinth in Greece.
Another question up here.
My name is Adonia Papathanasiou from Greece, not very far from Corinth. My question, I'm not a member, my question is, what does it say about the two different civilizations when the statue of Apollo in Greece is revered like a god and becomes a tray holder or a lamp holder in the Roman culture? Is it the Romans?
That's a really good question.
Romans more
Does it mean that they are bastardizing classical art, or does it mean that they revere it, but they have a completely different function for a statue because they don't put up statues in the archaic style of the god Apollo? And I think it's more a matter of reverence than it is the way we would see it, which is, what are they doing to these beautiful archaic and classical statues? I think it's more reverence, really. Although it comes off awfully strangely, doesn't it? Yeah, desecration, right.
David Rosen, lifetime member. Do you have any difficulty figuring out the dates of these statues when they were made? And
yes.
those two Hermes, are they actually classical or are they Roman, or those Hermes you showed?
Dating has traditionally been done purely by style. Now, if you find a statue in a house in Pompeii, you can pretty much date it to before 79 AD. But as far as if it's a classical statue, was it made in the 5th century or in the 1st century, once a style exists, it always exists because some people will always like it. The archaic, the classical continue. And so traditional stylistic dating is out the window. All we know about the two Herms is the one from the shipwreck comes from a wreck of about 80 BC. But was it just made? That one looks as if it's been ripped off its base. It's in a shipment with something like 23 beds and 70 columns. And it's as if they're equipping a villa or something. That's what the ship... It is Roman. It's a Roman shipment because the Romans from the 2nd century BC are shipping things back from Greece to Rome in quantity. And so it's really hard to date things. If you can date the destruction, you're lucky. The Charioteer of Delphi, we know, has a date of 474 probably, because we know the man who dedicated it from the historical record. But there are very few works like that that are dateable. It's a mess. Now, a portrait of an emperor, a Roman emperor, chances are, was made during that emperor's reign or lifetime, if we can identify him. We can't always.
Well, thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
No, wait. No, sorry. Before you go, we'd like to present you with a small token of appreciation, which is a framed copy of the announcement of your lecture, signed
Thank
by members of the General Committee on behalf of the membership.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Let me, shall I?
You can go now.
Okay, I can go now.
And then,
Okay.
and then we'll bring you back. So before we adjourn to the social hour, a few closing items. PSW depends on an enthusiastic, active, and capable membership. Without these, there is no PSW and no free lectures. So please join if you're not a member, And if you are a member, please get involved in helping carry out the Society's activities. You can apply for membership on the PSW website at www.philsoc.org or www.pswscience.org. There is a clearly demarked button for membership, and all you have to do is follow the directions. If you're a meetup member, any meetup members here tonight? Don't be shy. Okay, well, if you're a meetup member and you're not raising your hand, please keep in mind that being a meetup member does not make you a member of PSW, so please consider becoming a PSW member and contributing to the organization so that we can continue to provide these lectures. Please see membership chairman, oh, he's not here tonight. Please see our Vice President, Lloyd Mitchell, or our corresponding secretary, Robin Taylor, or our treasurer, John Ingersoll, if you have any questions about membership or making contributions. PSW is a nonprofit educational organization, tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, and contributions are tax deductible. Our next lecture will be the 2,360th meeting scheduled for Friday, March 18th, 2016 at 8 p.m. here in the Powell Auditorium. The speaker will be William H. Philander, Distinguished Scholar and Fellow in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering in the College of Engineering at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And he will be speaking on genetically engineered livestock, bringing 21st century medicines to the developing world. The rest of the spring schedule, except the Henry Lecture, has been posted to the website. Please check frequently for updates at www.pswscience.org. We will now adjourn the meeting to the social hour, which ends promptly at 10:30. Thereafter, PSW members and their guests meet at the Fairfax Hotel Lounge, just across Massachusetts Avenue. If you want to join us, but you're not sure how to get there, please look for Robin Taylor, Lloyd Mitchell, John Ingersoll, or myself, and we'll be happy to show you. Please use the side entrances to exit the building, and I will now entertain a motion by a member to adjourn to the social hour. I have second. All in favor? All opposed? 2,359th meeting is adjourned.